Hi everyone, welcome to the first lesson of Activity 1, Lesson 1-1. And today we are focusing on writing expressions for a sequence and using subscript notation. So make sure you have for this lesson your Springboard book, a notebook, which we'll talk about a little bit later to keep extra notes or extra paper, your calculator, and a pencil/highlighter. Now, the first couple lessons deal with DVD rental promotions, and we're going to focus at first on Bopper's DVD store. And at Bopper's, for your first rental, you are going to get a total of 3 points to your account. And for every subsequent rental after that, you get 2 additional points. So after your second rental, you're going to have a total of 5 points, then 7 points, 9 points, 11, 13. You get the idea. And finally, after 24 DVD points, you get a free DVD rental. Now, one of the things we're focusing on in this lesson in particular is the idea of subscript notation. Now, we're going to call this sequence here 3, 5, 7, 9, all that. That's going to be sequence B for Bopper's DVD rentals. And the N in that you'll see here means your term number. So for the first term, B sub 1, it was 3. The second term in B sub n is 5, third term 7, fourth term would be 9, etc., etc. And you're going to notice that in the reading math box to the right, that what subscript notation exactly is. Now, notice when you're talking about the sequence as a whole, they have these curly Q brackets around it. So when it says the first 8 terms of that sequence, it's 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, 15, 17. You get the idea. Those are the first 8. The book's sometimes a little inconsistent about that, but officially, if we're talking about the whole sequence, it wants the curly Q brackets. If you just have B sub n, that's just talking about, the list name and the sequence in general. And again, a sequence is just a list of items or numbers. Now, notice over here to the right, I have written this out. I highly recommend writing this somewhere, maybe on like a separate sheet of paper. Normally, when we are in class, I would give you a nice pretty printout of this to put in a binder to kind of keep track of formulas and vocabulary. There are a lot of formulas in this unit, so I highly recommend getting a piece of paper similar to this together. And then I usually like to summarize with some conclusions, what the lesson objectives were on the back. So just for your own sake, I think it's handy to keep track of the formulas over the next couple of lessons. Now back to this, B sub 7 then means that it is talking about the 7th term of our sequence, which in the context of this problem, B sub 7 is, again, the 7th term or the amount of points after the 7th DVD rental. So kind of understanding what it means in context versus it meaning it's the 7th term here. Now, an algebraic expression then is basically if we could come up with a formula so that if we plugged in a value for n, we would get that value in the sequence. So let's say n up here equals 1, 2, 3, again, representing the terms in the sequence. If we could just plug n into an expression, how could we get that output value, in this case of 3, 5, 7, 9? Now, if we play around with this, one thing you're going to notice is, so let's say B sub n equals n plus what to equal, in this case, for term number 1, we need it to equal 3, and for term number 2, we need it to equal 5. Well, n being 1 plus 2 equals 3. But if term 2 is 2, we're saying 2 plus 2 equals 5. Okay, that doesn't work out, so we know that can't possibly be the correct expression. Now, what we are going to notice is that if we have a 2 in front of this, 2 times 1 is 2, plus 1 is 3. And if we change that n now to 2 for the second term, plus 1, we'll see we start getting our sequence. And we could test that out for a third one. 2 times 3 plus 1 gives us 7. So we see this works out. So our expression here would be sub n equals 2n plus 1. Now, finally, for this page, what does n represent kind of in the context of this situation with that expression? Well, again, n is the number of DVD rentals. And basically what we're saying is twice the number of DVD rentals plus 1 is going to give us the total amount of points in our account. We'll talk a little bit about this, some ways to create an algebraic sequence a little bit later, but if we move on to page 4 in your books, they want you to take a moment to plot on this chart the amount of points you have after 1, 2, so using basically that chart on the last page up to DVD rental number 8. Now, what you are going to see then is something like this. Now, notice we did not connect these dots. Even though it looks like it's forming a line, we didn't connect the dots. Why is that? Well, that's because this is discrete data versus continuous data. Now, the reason it's discrete is because think about in the context of the situation, can we rent 1.5 DVDs? No. So that's why we can't draw a line connecting these, because there isn't data that's actually existing in between the points that we plotted. It's discrete versus continuous. Now, the next piece of this is to explain why this previous sequence is a function. Now, take a moment to either pause and reflect or Google search, what are some things that make an expression a function? Well, you should have noticed that it passes the vertical line test as a common answer. And the reason it passes the vertical line test is because it is what we like to call one-to-one, right? We have for every particular input value, there's only one output value. So that's called one-to-one. So there's a lot of ways you could have phrased that, but that's what makes b sub n a function. Now also, in addition to that, some properties, they're collinear, right? This graph is collinear. If we did draw on a line, all those points would lie in there. And again, it lands on said line, which is 2n plus 1. Okay. There are probably other properties we could list here. Usually we come up with more, but those are two of the biggies. Now, finally, we want to know how many times are we going to have to rent DVDs from Boppers to get our free rental? Well, if you will recall from the beginning here, we said that we get a free DVD after 24 rentals. So what that means for us is, if we go down here, we're basically going to take that expression we came up with, 2n plus 1, and set it equal to 24. And as we solve by subtracting 1 from both sides and dividing by 2, we get that it would take 11.5 rentals. Well, we just talked about up above here that this is discrete data, and there isn't such thing as rental number 11.5. So really, we have to round up and say it takes 12 rentals. Now, moving on to the check your understanding section. Notice here we have a new sequence entirely, 1, 8, 15. Probably could start seeing that pattern to predict the next couple of terms as well. Now, the reason that's helpful is to come up with an algebraic expression. So take a moment on your own and try and play around and see if you are correct. You should have gotten that our algebraic expression this time is 7n minus 6, actually, to get our next terms. Now, once you have this expression, it makes it much easier than listing out all of the terms to calculate what that 30th term is, because all we have to do is plug in for a sub n 30 for n, and we can calculate our value, which should be 204. Finally, similar to what we did up above, to then solve using that algebraic expression, we can set 7n minus 6 equal to 148. We can add that 6 over, divide by 7, and we get n to equal 22. So term 22 here is 148. Now, to make your life a lot easier than it probably was on 6A, many of you may be developing a little bit of a pattern for coming up with your algebraic expression. Notice up here, the pattern was each time that we had to add 7. Well, notice also the coefficient for n was 7. Back to the beginning here, when we first came up with the algebraic expression here, notice each time we were adding 2. Well, the coefficient on our expression was 2. So as we start looking at this problem number 7, notice each time we are adding 3, which means as we come up with our algebraic expression, 3 is going to be that coefficient on our expression. And as we start guessing and checking a little bit, if we say, okay, a sub 1, 3 times 1 is 4, I need to subtract 2 from that in order to get my first term, which is 2. And to keep testing out, okay, I need my second term to be 5. That's what it says it is right here. Well, 3 times, excuse me, let's try to subtract 1 over here. 3 times 2 minus 1 is 5. There we go. See, you catch your mistakes when you're doing that. And then finally, if you want to test it one last time, 3 times 3 is 9, minus 1 is 8. So we're getting that pattern there. So 3n minus 1 is our expression here. Now, one last note about subscript notation. A sub n is the current term in our sequence. If we say a sub n minus 1, this is talking about the previous term. And if we say a sub n minus 2, that would be 2 previous terms, which means if we talk about a sub n plus 1, that would mean the next term in our sequence. So if we say, okay, a sequence is defined, the first term here is 5. The next term then, a sub 1, n plus 1, that means the next term is 8 plus a sub n. What would the first 5 terms in the sequence be? Well, term number 1 they gave us was 5. And then they're telling us we are adding 8 to our current term. So the next term would be 13, add 8 more, add 8 more, add 8 more. Now, switching gears a little bit here, okay, we have a different rival to Boppers, which is called Fantastic Flips. And their promotion is you are going to start by getting 3 points for your first DVD rental. Your second rental gives you 5 points. Then you get 7 points. So we're starting off here. There's 2 separate sequences actually acting at once here. The first being the number of points you're getting. And so each time, notice in this sequence, you are adding 2 points each time is what you're earning. So there's a sequence right now, P sub n, which is actually the same as what we talked about previously with Boppers, 2n plus 1. Okay. Now, there's a second sequence here, though, acting, and that's f sub n. So we need to first off come up with that sequence. So after our first rental, we get 3 points total in our account. Well, rental number 2 has us adding 5 points to that, so we end up with 8. And then after rental 3, we add 7 points to our previous account balance. And hopefully you're kind of noticing here, we're adding that earned point total to our previous balance. So add the 9, add the 11, add the 13. Okay, so again, to kind of formalize that, what are we doing each time? We are adding current rental points to our previous balance. So in order to get the sum in our account after 7 rentals, we would have to add all of these points together, aka we would also have to add on a 15 here for a total value of 63 points for part C here. And to end up figuring out f sub 8, so we had added 3, 5, 7, all the way through 15. This was our 7th. In order to get 8, we need to then add 17 onto that 63 for a total of 80 points. Okay, so basically what we notice here is it isn't adding a same consistent value each time. In order to find the next term in our Fantastic Flicks rentals, in order to move on to the next point, what we're doing is we're taking the previous points and adding the value that we just had in the piece of it. So we're taking the previous balance plus the value of points we are earning. Okay. Another way you could have thought about that is to say the previous terms, right? So we're essentially saying each time you need to use, to get here, you're adding the previous with the current, okay? Now, again, just to summarize, this means the next term minus 1 would have been the previous term, all in reference to a current value, f sub n. Now, last thing we're going to cover here, sorry about this lengthiness, is if we then start plotting these. Now, you're going to notice p sub n, that first row that's filled in there, if you plot these, you will see it looks obviously very similar to what we had for the boppers plotting points, right? Identical. What you're going to notice as you plug in here is that you can only plot a couple of points here. Notice they only have us go through term 4 because otherwise we're off the charts. What you're going to notice is this linear? Absolutely not. Okay, it's growing at a much quicker rate. All right, is this linear? No. Okay, why not? All right, not a constant growth. Okay, aka we are not adding or subtracting a constant number to this. It's not linear. All right, the rest of the notes we don't really necessarily need to chat about. All right, that was kind of the big stuff here. Like I said before, I really highly recommend writing these pieces down. This was from that first page with the sequence. And again, officially an arithmetic sequence then is the sequence of consecutive numbers that have a constant sum, aka distance. You're either adding or subtracting the same number consistently. Okay, that's going to be our arithmetic. So again, going back to the boppers versus the Fantastic Flicks growth. All right, thanks for watching. See you guys tomorrow.